Hi guys, it's Jack from Cool Chess Videos here. Today I'll be doing a relatively simple introduction to new chess learners, and it'll just be a simple how the pieces move. I won't do anything complex. I won't include openings. I won't include any strategy. I can do that in later videos if you guys want. But today I'll just be focusing on the core. How do the pieces actually move? So, as you can see on the chessboard, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pawns on each side. On each side, we also have 2 rooks on both opposite ends. We have a knight, 4 knights. We also have 2 bishops. And then we have the queens. And finally the king. So, first of all, we're going to learn how the pieces move. And then we're going to learn the strategy of the game of chess. So, pawns. On move 1, pawns can go 2 squares. So pawns can go 2 squares, 2 squares, 2 squares, 2 squares. But after it's gone those 2 squares, it cannot go 2 squares again. So as I go now, it just won't allow me to go 2 squares again. I can only go 1 square this time, I can't go the other. So what this means is on move 1 you can choose to play this. You can choose to play, okay, let me start again. You can move, on move 1 you can move the pawns 2 squares or 1 square. After move 1, after you've moved the pawn once, you cannot move it 2 squares again. So let's say I play d3. My opponent responds d5. Now I cannot go 2 squares forward now, but I can go 2 squares forward with this pawn. I can go 2 squares forward with this pawn, which means that I can go 2 squares forward with this pawn, but not this pawn. Remember, because we already moved this pawn once. Remember, we could play any move 2 squares apart from the pawn that we already moved 1 square. But that's only on move 1. So now let's take a look at how do pawns actually, how do they take each other? Well, so pawns take each other diagonally, and they have to be forward. So they have to be on the same colour. They have to be kind of diagonally. So if a pawn is here, if say a pawn is back here, this cannot take. You cannot take this pawn. This pawn is not able to. You can't take it. But let's say white plays d4 now. Now, because there is tension between the pawns, this pawn takes diagonally, and it can't take this pawn. If they're opposite each other, they can't take, and that's why pawns are useful, but they also kind of stand in your position, because they can't just take right in front of them, they have to take sideways. And then I offer another one, and then they take it. So that's kind of the essence of how pawns move. Let's look at how knights move now. So knights, look, as you can see how my arrow moves, knights move in a sort of L shape. So knights move in this L shape, which is kind of strange to people who never played chess before. These L shapes, they kind of get a bit hard to kind of imagine, but the thing is simple. If my knight is in the middle, let's play a stupid move. If my knight can go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares, 8 squares. My knight can go to 8 squares. Right now. Yeah, so my knight can go to 8 squares, and it can go back, forward, sideways. It can go any direction, but it has to be in this sort of L shape, like on chess.com's arrow. It's in this L shape. So that's knights. Okay, so next we'll look at bishops. Bishops, bishops go just on their diagonal. So, in chess, there are 2 bishops for each side, and you'll notice how the bishops, there's a dark square bishop and a light square bishop on each side. So you'll notice that the light square bishop, say I wanted to develop my bishop to c4, then black would do the same mirror image to bishop c5, then you would get like the bishop moves diagonally, and it also takes diagonally. So a dark squared bishop doesn't come off the dark squares. If, say, I play a move like a4, the dark square bishop can never touch this pawn, but that's why there's a light square bishop too. So let's say I was to play pawn to d6, this bishop coming out can now target this pawn, whereas it couldn't before, because this dark square pawn can't target, this dark square bishop, can't target this pawn on light squares, but this light square bishop can, which is why developing pieces to your advantage is so important in chess. So that's how bishops move. Bishops also take diagonally. They don't take in a strange way. They just take on the same path. So this bishop could take this pawn. Let's say this. This bishop could take this pawn, would check, and takes back. But we'll look at checks at the end of this video, and to see what a check is. So now we've looked at pawns, bishop, pawns, knight, bishop. So now we'll look at we can look at rooks. So rooks are better than bishops. Can anyone tell me why? If you guys know in the comments, why is that? Because they can get to any square of the board. So rooks, they kind of go in straight lines, but if you see on the chessboard, the bishops can only really access half the board. But the rooks can always, like this rook, if it wanted to, can end up on this square by just transferring out. By just transferring out, then it can end up on this square. But the rook moves in straight lines and takes in straight lines. So that's pretty straightforward, right? So the most powerful piece, not the most important, but the most powerful piece in chess is your queen, which is this one here. So what the queen does is it's a combination of both the rook and the bishop. So a queen can move in diagonals, and it can also move in straight lines, which is why the queen is so effective. But one of the queen's weaknesses, if you like, is that it can't take knights. It can take knights, but knights can attack it easily. So let's say the queen was up here. This knight can easily attack this queen. Because remember, knights go in this L shape, but queens can't take in this L shape. The queens aren't everyone squished together. They're just the rook and the bishop. But knights are kind of its weak point, if you like. So now we've done all of that. We can now focus on the king. So the king is the most important piece in chess, and it can only move one square in each direction, so it's pretty simple. The king can only move these squares, but it can't take your own pawns, so the king only has 3 legal squares to go on right now. This king only has 1. So let's say we get this. Don't do this when you play chess. Don't bring your king out like this. But this is just an example of how kings move. They also take this way. And next I'll show you what a check is. Okay, so a check is when the king is being attacked. So let's say this king moved up and we got this, 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 and then this. So this is a check. This is a check because you're threatening to take the king, right? Yeah. So if you can take the king, then that is, if you attack the king, it's a check, right? This bishop hits the king, because we learned how bishop moves before, moves in diagonals along the light square complexes. So this bishop on the light squares is effective because it checks the king, and the king has to move, because in chess the most important piece is the king. The most powerful is the queen, but the most important is the king. So a check is when the king is, say, under attack. Oh, this did lose a queen, by the way. That's not just me, like, being stupid. So that's a check. A checkmate is when the king is being attacked and has no other moves where it wouldn't be taken. Let me show you. So this is what is known as the wayward queen attack in chess. So come out. I know I won't show you openings, but this is like just an example of a checkmate. So you take the pawn on f7, and this is checkmate because the king has no moves where it wouldn't be taken by the queen. Because the king has to move right now, right? Because otherwise the queen will just take it. So the king can't move here, and it can't stay where it is. But then why can't the king just take this? Well, that is for a different reason. Because if the king can't take the queen because the bishop is guarding the queen. And because should the king take the queen, then the bishop would take the king. And in effect, if you can take the king, then you win in chess. Because effectively, you can take this queen, but then you get taken, and that's a checkmate. But like chess, it's not a legal move for you to move into a check. So that's mate if. This is a kind of common checkmate where there's a queen supported by another piece on this square. So that's checkmate when the king is in check, as I said before, check when the king is being attacked. It can be by any piece apart from the enemy king. Enemy kings can't touch each other, right? But apart from the enemy king, the king is free to the king can go around. The king can, like, if it's in check and has no other moves where it wouldn't be in check, then that's checkmate. So next we'll look at promotion. So if this pawn were to reach the other side, then this becomes a queen. Then this pawn will become a queen, sorry. So let's say we get this, I'll try and queen, this, just bear with me a sec, this, then this pawn took this rook and made a queen. It made a queen because when pawns get to the other side of the board, they become queens. And that's well, there are 3 stages in chess, in a game of chess. There's the opening, the middle game, which is often the kind of trickiest part of the game, and then there's end games, which are kind of, I feel, more about practice and just like being like just trying like a lot of different, just practicing a lot, trying to find the best solutions. But in end games, queening pawns is one of the most effective ways to win, because if you can queen pawns, then you become queens, and with queens you can then checkmate your opponent more easily, because on their own, knights can't checkmate the king. It's just physically impossible for a knight on its own with the king to checkmate. It's just impossible. But the bishop on its own still can't. But a queen on its own can, because it controls more squares around the king. So let's say this king was on the edge. Let's say the king was on let's say the king was on say the king was on here. Let's say the king was here. The king was, sorry, not here, and the black queen was. Let's say we got this, and then the black queen was here. So this is checkmate, because where can the king go where it doesn't get taken by the queen? Here, taken by the queen, because that's taken by the queen. That's being taken by the queen. But where else can the king go where it's not going to be taken by the queen? Nowhere, right? And if you take the king, you win in chess effectively. But chess.com doesn't chess like in general. It's an illegal move if you walk into a check, because it's automatic. The king taking the king. So if it's a mate, then your king will be attacked, and it will have no moves where it won't be attacked. That's a checkmate. That's the aim of the game. So I just got a new analysis. So now what we'll look at is draws and the point system in chess. So I'll do the point system first, actually. So pawns are worth 1 point. They're like often in video games. There's like the tiny soldiers you let out to fight first, while you just hide your army behind. These are like the foot soldiers. And so they're worth 1 point. Knights are worth 3. Bishops are worth 3. But because rooks can get to every square on the board, rooks are worth 5. Both of these rooks are worth 5. Queen is worth 9. And the king is priceless, because if you lose it, you lose the game, right? But the point system in chess is kind of confusing, because if you don't, the points doesn't matter. If you're down 20 points of material, then you can still win the game. It's not like you're going to lose, but the point system is just a way to kind of communicate how good your position is. Because right now, white is just taking a pawn. It's now +1 material advantage down here. It's now +1 material advantage for white, because he took that pawn, remember? But now queen takes, and material is back equal. So let's say I play knight out, and then knight's like, oh, I'm attacking your queen. But let's say black doesn't see it. Then I have to take your queen. It's +9 points of material now. So that's why the point system, the material system in chess, isn't that kind of reliable, because often when players are pawn down, you get this thing in chess, what's known as compensation, which is a very nice position, a big attack, or very formidable defense. And lots of these things, if you just sacrifice, it could be a pawn, it could be a knight, it could be a rook, it could be a queen. I mean, you can sacrifice anything apart from the king, but you could you get in chess compensation for it, and you can build up. Let's say you sacrifice a pawn to open a rook up, because often if pawns aren't here, then rooks are just menaces often with the open files. So that's like how the pieces. That's how like the point system works. So next we're going to look at draws. So there can be some draws. So let's say if we get d4, d5. So this would be a draw. Bishop out, bishop out, bishop back, bishop back, bishop out, bishop out, bishop. And then if you repeat moves, if each player repeats 3 times, then it's a draw, right? Yeah, so that's a draw if you repeat moves 3 times. So there's quite a lot of ways to lose to draw in chess, right? One is a stalemate, which is kind of fascinating. It's when the king is not in check, but no other piece can move. So let's say it's just a king on the board. The king isn't in check, but every square around it is covered by an enemy piece. That would be a draw by stalemate, because literally the king has no moves without being taken. That's kind of often a beginner mistake, is to often accidentally stalemate in endgames, which is quite kind of sad. One way to draw also is if you can't checkmate the opponent, then if you don't have enough material to checkmate the opponent, then it's a draw. So if it's bishop and king versus bishop and king, then it's a draw, because the bishops on their own can't checkmate the king. It's physically impossible. But if it was pawn bishop king versus pawn bishop king, then because pawns can become queens and you can checkmate with queens, if you get the pawns to the other side of the board, then you can checkmate and win the game if you have a queen, which is kind of like which is how you win endgames, because no matter how much material down, often pawns are the biggest assets in endgames, and it's often better to have, like, say 3 pawns than a rook, often in lots of endgames, where if you just make a queen, it's like kind of done the game, because you checkmate the opponent so kind of quickly, because like not quickly, but because if you can checkmate the opponent easily with queens, whereas if you just have a rook and a king, often it's kind of tricky to find like the right sort of checkmate. I think that's all we've covered. Oh, also ways to win. So you can checkmate. Your opponent can resign if they're in a bad position. And you can win on time. So on chess.com, when you play games against other people, you'll play games with time limits, and if the timer goes down to 0, then you lose. But if you don't have enough material to checkmate, and your opponent runs out of time. No, if you don't have enough material to checkmate, and your opponent runs out of time, then it's a draw, because it's draw by It's draw by timeout and insufficient material, because like black, it's impossible for the king on its own to win the game, right? But let's say they had white, the opponent had all their pieces, but they ran out of time. It will be a draw by, what I said before, draw by insufficient material and timeout, because the king is kind of bound to be checkmated, right? Whereas even if the king just had one pawn, then the side with just the king and the pawn would win on time, because the pawn can become a queen, right? So it's that draw I told you guys about with the insufficient material, because I guess it's kind of cruel if someone's completely winning and their opponent just has a king to win to just be like completely to lose on time. So that's why it's a draw. It's kind of fascinating how this game works. Yeah, I think that's all we need. Yeah, I think that's it for now. If you guys want any very simple openings, I can do videos on, like, I don't know, very simple openings. If you have any ideas, I can do videos on like the just e4 e5 openings. I can also do videos on just e4 e5. I can do e4 e5, sorry, and d4 d5. Just tell me. I won't probably put complex stuff out there for you beginners, but I can put some basic openings, and I can also do a video on opening principles. I think I'll do that next. So that's it for now. Thanks guys for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye.